Well, good evening, everyone. It is exciting to be with you this evening. My name is Aya Kubara-Anelli, and I will MC you through this event. At this point, we are just going to jump right in because I know you guys came to hear some great presentations. Of course, we have an amazing speaker in our midst today. It's February 28th. It happens to be the last day of Black History Month. Some people call it African American History Month, and we're really excited that Central Texas College has continuously had great programs every year. Of course, we believe that we don't just celebrate or study Black history in February, but that it is something that we should be studying year-round. And certainly the events in our country over the last few days, particularly this month, indicate just how much more knowledge we need in this area. So we're really excited to have you all here this evening, and I welcome you. So at this point, I am going to call on Larry Davis. He's the Director of Student Services and the Chief Diversity Officer at Texas A&M University, and he is going to open us up with prayer.
Let us all bow. O Ancient of Days, Spirit and One, please anoint the presenters and performers as we celebrate the African American experience in America, Texas, and Central Texas. Father, let us all leave more determined to continue making and leaving this world better than it was when we first entered it. This is our humble request. Amen.
Now, this event would not be possible without the gentleman that you are going to hear from next. He is the brain, if you will, behind this, and this has been an event that's been going on for quite a few years right here in Killeen. And so, without further ado, Mr. Horace Grace.
Good evening.
Sir.
Well, as she said, I'm Horace Grace, and I'm certainly proud to be here to see all these smiling faces. We had 400 chairs set up in here and look like they're almost full.
Yes.
Tonight, I'm wearing two hats. I am the chair of the Central Texas College Foundation Board, and also the chair for the Center for African American Studies. Now, I want to talk a little bit first about the foundation. We have approximately an $8 million endowment here at the college. And last year we gave away 200 scholarships at the tune of $350,000. Now that's what we did. And with the help of my board, we have already raised close to $600,000 this year. And hopefully we're going to do $1 million before the year is over. Now, one of the problems that we are having this year is that we can't find enough students to apply for the scholarships. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, we're going to have about $400,000 to give away on 31 March. Wow. So now you got a whole month, you students that needs a scholarship to apply. And our executive director, Marcine Chambers, is here along with Wendy. And all you have to do is go on the website for Central Texas College and apply. We even took the requirement of writing a paragraph out of the requirement just to get you all to apply for the scholarship. But we really want you to do that, and we want you to support the foundation as much as you can. The center is moving in a good fashion. We we have, at the center, we have done a lot of good things. We have raised approximately $50,000 endowment just from the center. Last year, the center awarded 3 scholarships for African Americans and those students who applied. So we are doing a great job, and I just appreciate you all coming out tonight. We're going to have a dynamite speaker, and I hope that you walk away from here saying, boy, I have learned a lot about the center as well as about African American history. So thank you very much, and we're going to move this program on. All right.
So, you know, although our guest speaker came all the way from Washington, D.C., we got some amazing talent right here in Central Texas. You guys know this, right? So at this time, we are going to hear from an incredibly talented young lady. I'm looking for her. Where is she? Ah, okay. I was going to say, Shania Mauna Kea is going to share a musical selection with us. Shania is an 11th grader at Harker Heights High School and an incredibly well-rounded student and an amazing young lady, and I'm really glad that she's here to share her talent with us tonight. Awesome.
To encourage yourself. Right. Sometimes you have to speak victory during the test, and no matter how you feel, speak the word and you will be healed. Speak over yourself, encourage yourself in the Lord. All right. Sometimes you have to encourage yourself. Sometimes you have to speak victory during the test, and no matter how you feel, speak the word and you will be healed. Speak over yourself, encourage yourself in the Lord. Sometimes you have to speak the word over yourself. The pressure is all around, but God is a present help. Oh, the enemy created woes, but remember, giants, they do fall. Speak over yourself, encourage yourself in the Lord. Lord.
Let's hear it again for Shania. So, you know, sometimes we think, okay, history must be this boring thing, which I don't understand where people come from with that, because every day we're creating history, aren't we?
Yes.
And so in our presence today, we have two young budding historians who participated, actually they represented their school at the National History Day presentation at Baylor University. And the first person you're going to hear from is an 8th grader. Her name is McKenna Morrow. Am I saying it right? And McKenna actually is going to be going to state to present her National History Award. And as she comes up, I want to very quickly acknowledge her principal, Mr. Taylor, who is here from South Belton Middle School. And I also want to acknowledge, I don't know why y'all are all the way in the back. I want to acknowledge Ms. Connor and also Mrs. Burney. Thank you so much for coming out. You know, sometimes public schools get a bad name, but I have to tell you that these teachers work incredibly hard. And I saw them up close and personal in the evening, on the weekends. I mean, just crazy hours working with these young ladies. So as brilliant as these young ladies are, they've also had a lot of support. Also, if McKenna's mom is still in here, she's been driving her back and forth. She actually just came from a track meet where she ran 1.5 miles. She's going to present and she's going to go back to the track meet. So let me not hear anyone complain here about what they have to do. McKenna, come on up. And I have to figure out how to exit out of here. Lord, help a sister. Okay, and where is your presentation? Yes.
Good evening, my name is McKenna Morrow and I am an 8th grade student at South Belton Middle School. Tonight I am here to discuss with you a topic that is often overlooked in the slave narrative. In the traditional slave narrative, many historians, students, and teachers focus on the hardships and the daily life of slaves, as well as the treatment of freedmen following the end of the Civil War. However, I would like to spend the next few minutes discussing a less talked about topic in the institution of slavery. One of the tragic hardships that came with slavery in the 1800s in the United States was the separation of families. Slave families were separated for many different reasons that were intentional and unintentional. Nevertheless, separating families played an emotional and psychological toll on the slaves. Mothers, children, husbands, brothers, and sisters were separated, not knowing if they would ever see each other again. None of the slave owners cared about what happened to slave families or how they were treated. In many cases, slave owners intentionally separated families to break them down mentally and to further force submission. Several slaves ran away from their owners in an attempt to reunite with their lost family members. However, very few of them succeeded. Slaves were forced to wait for their freedom and were hopeful in that they would be reunited with their families again. In many cases, slaves passed away without ever reuniting with their families. Emancipation in 1863 was an illusion for most African Americans. Although they were technically free, African American life did not reflect the same freedom as white Americans. In the South, black codes were introduced, which was slavery just under a different name. Although African Americans gained different freedoms from the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, the lingering effects of slavery would last forever. Generations of people would never know their family members because they were torn apart by slavery. Slavery might have been over, but the consequences affected the nation then as it still affects the United States today. Starting in 1863, following the Emancipation Proclamation, many freedmen posted advertisements in newspapers to urge the American people to help reunite families that had been torn apart by slavery. These ads in newspapers across the country proved the severity of the damage that occurred to detached African American families. These advertisements included physical description of the family members, last known locations, the name of slave masters, and any other information that they had. Because of these ads, some African Americans were able to be reunited with their loved ones. Sadly, some African Americans would never be reunited with their families. Some reason why this occurred is due to the lack of information of the missing members, or family members had already passed away. Another reason to consider is that under slavery, slaves were not allowed to learn to read or write. This would play a huge role in the number of African American families that would not be reunited. However, through these advertisements, we can take a glimpse into the desperate stories of these African Americans. Due to the amount of available information provided by freedmen, although it might have not been much, and the help of sympathetic Americans, these newspaper ads made it possible for some African American families to be reunited. Reuniting families after emancipation was not an easy task. It took determination, motivation, and having faith to reunite families. Although the number of reunited families is small compared to the number of families that would never be reunited, the families that were reunited were able to rejoice and live a life without having a hole in their heart because loved ones were missing. Even though slavery is a dark time in our history that most want to ignore, cover up, or disregard, it is important to remember, acknowledge, and discuss this pivotal time period. If we want to move forward in remembering racial ties that continue to divide our nation, all aspects of the slave narrative, daily life, treatment, plantation life, leisure activities, religion, culture, reuniting families, and life after emancipation need to be taught and discussed within the history of our nation. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share and speak to you tonight.
Never too early to start with history, right? Did she do a phenomenal job? Good luck at the track meeting. Good luck at state. So in our midst, we actually have some firsts. It's unfortunate that we are still at a time when we're still having to recognize firsts, African Americans, but I do not want to miss this opportunity to recognize some of the firsts that I'm aware of. I'm always learning. So if you're first and I don't recognize you, don't get upset at me. Just like tap me and I'll make sure I do it later. But the very first African American to ever become mayor of the city of Killeen is right here with his beautiful wife. Mayor Hancock, if you'll please stand. Y'all need to clap a little harder than that. And let me tell you why. To break through barriers that have been intentionally put up. Right. And that first person who goes through usually has some deep scars that we may never see. So when someone breaks through, we need to be paying homage, okay? We also in our midst have the very first African American to be elected Justice of the Peace in the county, Bell County, in 169-year history. George Brown. We also have the first African American to be elected as a commissioner in Bell County. Just made history a few months ago. Commissioner John Driver. I wanted to do this man, make sure that I read out all his accolades because he's also the one who's made this possible. Mr. Horace Grace, first African American in Bell County to serve as director of a federal chartered bank. I believe he's probably the only African American who sits on any of the boards for any of the banks in this area. First African American in Bell County elected countywide as president of Clearwater Underground Water Conservation District. and of course one of the few African Americans to be approved for burial in the Texas State Cemetery for Heroes.
Awesome.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe Michelle Carter is the first African American vice president ever at Central Texas College, right where we are. Please stand and be recognized. The good news is that they've broken through.
Yes.
I guess it's not bad news, it's good news that there's still a lot of areas that need to be broken through as well. So there's work for each and every one of us to do. And some of you need to be helping to open these doors as well. At this time, I am going to introduce another speaker really quickly before we get to our main course, if you will. She is also a student from South Belton Middle School, an 8th grader. I want to give a shout out to her dad because he's been running up and down and making sure everything was in place. And if you get a chance to look at the exhibit, that camouflage board over there, he was responsible for getting it around and all of that, and we really appreciate all that you do. And at this time, I am going to ask Miss Anna and Nellie, she happens to be my daughter, to come up and share her National History Day presentation. Anna?
Good evening. My name is Inigo Chipp. I go to South Belton Middle School and I'm in 8th grade. And I'm delighted to be here to share with you an important event in history called the Brownsville Affair that happened right here in Texas. And it also took 66 for the matter to be addressed and justified. It all started in 1866 when black infantry started. And African Americans serving in the military was just an honor and another way to make money so they could provide for their families. In 1906, the 25th Infantry Regiment, which was an all-black regiment, was ordered to serve at Fort Brown in Brownsville, Texas. Now, the residents in Brownsville protested, they wrote letters, they sent them to the president, and the commander of the 25th Infantry Regiment also wrote letters to the president saying that this wasn't a good idea and that they didn't want them here in Brownsville, Texas, but they were still ordered to go to Fort Brown. Many racial incidents led up to the big event, like the alleged assault of a white woman by a Negro soldier, and finally on August 13, 1906, around midnight, one white man was killed and another Hispanic man was wounded. Despite records that all of the soldiers were accounted for 10 minutes after the shooting, everyone in town assumed that it was the Negro soldiers, and so did the mayor. The matter became more serious, and eventually it got taken to the president, and an investigation was started. The president couldn't charge anyone with a crime because no one said anything because no one knew anything about this. The president mistook it as a code of silence. The soldiers had no trial, no day in court, and President Roosevelt dishonorably discharged the whole 25th Infantry Regiment, which was 167 servicemen. They got no benefits and they could never serve in a government position or in the army. Senator Foraker believed the men should have had the chance to prove their innocence. He disagreed with President Roosevelt's actions and continued to fight for them. President Roosevelt didn't like this, and he tried to bribe Senator Foraker to stop fighting for them, but he refused. And unfortunately, because of this, he lost his senator position and eventually was ruined politically. Now, another important thing that happened was that they waited after the election of President William Howard Taft to publish that they had dishonorably discharged all these soldiers because they knew that the African Americans would be mad that that the Republicans had discharged this many people and they wouldn't vote for him. This is also what influenced the African Americans moving away from the Republican Party and going to the Democratic Party. This event also influenced the creation of the NAACP. In 1970, John D. Reaver made a book called The Brownsville Raid. Representative Augustus F. Hawkins read this book and worked to correct this wrong. In 1972, the 25th Infantry Regiment all received honorable discharges. Soon after, Lieutenant William Baker worked to get sole survivors and widows a tax-free pension. And in 1973, President Nixon signed legislation compensating survivors and widows of dead victims of the Brownsville affair. Dorsey Willis was the only survivor when the legislations were passed, and Edward Warfield was also alive when it passed, but he was one of the 14 men in 1910 allowed to re-enlist and served and got compensated in 1919. In closing, it goes to show how unjust life was back then, and how people can turn a blind eye to racism even if it's happening right in front of them. Thank you for allowing me to share this historical event with you.
Yeah, I'm a proud mama. Okay, so the moment that we've all been waiting for. I, again, have to pull up his accolades because I absolutely have to do him justice. We're really excited to have the speaker that we have with us today. I could tell stories, but I will stick to the script. Dr. Greg Carr is an associate professor of Africana Studies and the chair of the Department of Afro-American Studies at Howard University. And he's also an adjunct faculty at the Howard School of Law. He holds a PhD in African American Studies from Temple University and a Juris Doctorate from the Ohio State University College of Law. The School District of Philadelphia's first resident scholar on race and culture, Dr. Carr led a team of academics and educators in the design of a curriculum framework for Philadelphia's mandatory high school African American history course. Wow. We may need something like that in this area, just a hint. And there is someone who's already done it, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. These materials are the first to approach African American history using an Africana Studies methodology. He's a co-founder of the Philadelphia Freedom Schools Movement, a community-based academic initiative that has involved over 13,000 elementary, high school, and college students. Dr. Carr has presented his curriculum work for the Board of Public Education in Salvador and has lectured across the U.S. and in Ghana, Egypt, South Africa, Brazil, France, and England, among other places. We're not ready for you yet. And if you want to hear more about Egypt, he will be teaching at our weekly African American history class that meets every Saturday at 9:30 a.m. at the Village. See me if you need directions, because it is good, because every day is a good day to learn about African American history. Okay. His publications have appeared in, among other places, the African American Studies Reader, Socialism and Democracy, Africana Studies, Publications of the Modern Language, Association of America, the National Urban League's 2012 State of Black America, and Malcolm X, a Historical Reader. He also, didn't you just write the foreword for a new book? For Dick Gregory? Yes, he did. Dr. Carr is the first vice president of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations and a former member of the board of the National Council for Black Studies. He's a grantee of Howard's Fund for Academic Excellence, an invited lecturer on pedagogy and from Howard Center for Excellence in Teaching, Learning, and Assessment. He has been named, this is huge, he has been named Professor of the Year 3 times by the Howard University Student Association. That is huge. Yo, clap. year twice for all historically black colleges and universities in the entire nation. Okay, I can't read everything, but I will share this part because some of us, we like to know, well, who's this person and what qualifies them to come speak to us, right? So let me share this part. He's the co-editor of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations multi-volume African World History Project and has represented Howard University as a spokesman in a wide range of print and electronic media, including Ebony Magazine, the New York Times, Washington Post, USA Today, MSNBC, National Public Radio, BBC America, C-SPAN, MTVU, Voice of America, The Tavis Smiley Show, Diverse Magazine, CNN, and Lisa's favorite, because that's why she's here, The Roland Martin Show. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, we welcome Dr. Greg Carr.
Okay, I think it should be on. Is it on? Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Is that it? That's it, right? Appreciate you. Thank you, Aya. And Aya for almost 30 years, which is crazy. She doesn't age, so I'm not gonna tell her age, but elementary school. Dr. Nelly, I just before y'all got together and had their family, she tried to tear up all of Ohio. So I don't know if they still allow you to even go into the state of Ohio. Ohio State. It's very important though, and I'm sure some of you all, well, first of all, thank you all for allowing me to come and spend a few minutes. And I could have listened to those presentations. That would have been fine to just keep going with that scholarship, because when I was that age, I certainly would not have been able to do that kind of work. And on that touched my heart when you started talking about the Brownsville affair. That's very serious. And I'm gonna check that exhibit out. I saw the pictures of it on social media, now I get to see it in real life. So I appreciate you for that. That the 24th, 25th regiments and 9th, 10th Cavalry, that's the Buffalo soldiers. So it's very important that you do that work. And, 2 weeks ago I was in Kansas City and I wasn't able to stay. I was only there for the day. And I wish I could have stayed a little longer, because as Aya reminded me after I was there, Jack Robinson, who spent time in Fort Hood, also spent time near Kansas City. He was stationed there first, and they brought him in the 9th Cavalry. So he was technically a Buffalo soldier. A lot of people know him for baseball. Don't know all the letters he won at UCLA. Also that he was the Negro youth tennis champion in the country, following his big brother Mac, who ran with Jesse Owens in 1936. But Jackie Robinson is tied to this community as well as in Kansas City, and so it's a special pleasure to be here to hear that conversation. So you got to keep writing that up. We have a journal. We might publish that. So you can keep writing that up. We're going to work on that. And I'm so sorry that McKenna had to leave, because there's a book by Andrea Williams called Help Me to Find My People. It's very important on that subject of trying to reunite families after the Civil War. And I hadn't planned on discussing this, but of course ancestors don't make any mistakes. And some of you all know this story better than I do. It was apocryphal to me. I tried to do some research about 10 or 15 years ago. Best I come up with was a couple of book chapters, one on folklore in Texas that explores the possible roots. But I know there's a song they sing in this state, the Yellow Rose of Texas. And I'm sure many of you all know that song better than I do. And I also know that McKenna's presentation could in fact, some scholars would say does have a deep expression in that song. Because the yellow rose of Texas, according to some scholars, was not white.
Right. Yeah.
She's the sweetest rose of color this soldier ever knew. Her eyes are bright as diamonds, they sparkle like the dew. You may talk about your dearest maid and sing of Rosalie, but the yellow rose of Texas, the only girl for me. You can talk about the white women, but I fought this war so I could reunite with my woman, the yellow rose of Texas.
All right.
And in that same song, he talks about playing the banjo slowly. You know, the banjo is an African instrument.
Okay.
It's brought here from Africa. He talks about going south to see his Uncle Joe. You going south? I thought the Emancipation Proclamation meant everybody was going north. But what McKenna was laying out is that people went wherever their people were. And sometimes that meant going deeper south. And I'm from Tennessee, so when in that song they talk about the Civil War, some of the scholars argue that the Yellow Rose of Texas was really about a black couple. And black folks trying to reunite their families. But I know that's not news to y'all in here because y'all Texas experts and I am not. So I'm not. I'm just glad to be in Texas. I want to thank a couple people before I get started. Nancy came and got me from the airport. Thank you, Nancy Pettaway. I appreciate that. Brother Grace, we have students in dire need of financial aid at Howard University. So if you can't find them here, we can work that out, brother. No, but it means something to have a Center for African American Studies and Research anywhere. About a month ago, I was at Purdue University, and I was telling Nancy they have a wonderful African American resource center, but it's rare to have those centers around the country. You know, it's popular to be black now, but that don't necessarily translate into resources. As Greg Tate, my friend Greg Tate used to say, you want everything from black folks but the burden. So let's have a song, let's have a little dance. Can you sink a three-pointer? You know, 3 yards in a cloud of dust. I don't know. What Texas? This is a branch of Texas Agricultural and Mechanical, right? This is Texas A&M. Central College is affiliated with Texas A&M.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. Yeah. Well, I went to Tennessee A&I because you know during segregation they ain't let Negroes go to school with white folks. The A&Ms and the A&Is were divided by race. But A&M is in what, I grew up in Tennessee, so that was the, we used to call it the slave economic concern, but I think they call it the Southeast Caucus. You know, they got professional athletes disguised as college football players. But what conference is Texas A&M in?
SEC.
I appreciate that. See, I don't keep up with it, because once I stepped away from it, I kept running and never looked back. They are in the SEC now, aren't they?
Yeah.
I'm going to talk for a few minutes, and then hopefully we can have a bit of a conversation about this question of how we create a nation, how we create a country. And, I forgot they were in the SEC. That's interesting because, of course, my friend and brother Roland Martin, who did let me leave tonight, because, you know, he's from Houston, so he said, you can go to Texas. I missed it tonight. They were on TV. I wanted to be there tonight because they were debriefing what happened on Capitol Hill yesterday, for those of you who watched that dance. But, you know, he went to Texas A&M. Yeah, he Texas A&M grad. And when we start talking about creating community, creating nation, we have to remember that the United States is not a nation.
All right.
It's not a nation. It's a settler state with a lot of different national interests in it. Because if a nation means a common people, a common language, a common culture, common memories, there's no way this place could ever be a nation. It requires a certain violence of forgetting. It requires certain erasures. We talk about wanting to teach history, but I'm not sure that that's necessarily the goal. When I was a kid, you know, it meant something to be in one of those college campuses. They were regional. You had the Big East, SEC. Texas A&M was in something else. Was it Big 12? Yeah, right. And some of y'all saying that with fondness, remember, because the United States used to be divided by those loyalties. But of course, commerce has taken over now, so it's where you can make the money. And the thing doesn't necessarily make sense. But when you tinker with people's memories, you create a situation where you might create a circumstance where nobody's loyal to anything. So I think it's fittingly and appropriate on the last day of so-called Black History Month that we be here in Texas, a place that is wholly contrived in imagination with a whole lot of violences of forgiveness.
Wow.
To have a conversation about what it means to possibly get to the point where we don't have to have a Black History Month.
All right.
I think about the fact that as I was growing up, maybe some of y'all growing up, we learned about the Alamo, Davy Crockett, and Jim Bowie, and all them. But they didn't teach us that Mexico had abolished enslavement.
That's right.
And that Africans were trying to get to Mexico. And then when John C. Calhoun, the intellectual architect of the Confederacy, advocated for what became the Mexican War, and eventually the annexation of Texas, because people had run out here trying to create their own country, that ultimately that whole narrative gets flipped on its head. And that Santa Anna wasn't a bad guy in the eyes of a whole lot of people. In fact, we standing in northern Mexico, and may still be standing in northern Mexico in 20 years. But a lot of that will depend on how we imagine community. And what I've seen just in a few minutes tonight is a blessing and a reminder that we can always create community from various communities if we just, is that me? Okay, let's see, man, I ain't rubbing on nothing. Okay, oh, okay, we got it. Very good. If we can see beyond our differences to create some type of community, that doesn't mean we're going to be the same.
Right.
But it does mean that we will have to probably trade some differences that we're just going to have to let remain differences. A couple of other things. I hadn't met you, Justice Brown, but she said in my ear that she's a relative of Alan Mercer Daniel, who was the longtime librarian at the Howard University School of Law. And we understand, of course, that some of those cases, of course, came out of Texas that were litigated by Howard-trained lawyers, trained by the great Charles Hamilton Houston. First and foremost, of course, Thurgood Marshall. But folks like Oliver Hill, Spotswood Robinson. One of the cases that they intervened on, of course, the case well known here in Texas, Hyman Sweat. Sweat versus Painter. Where they said, oh yeah, we got to send you out to law school, but you ain't got to go to Austin. We'll just make you up a law school. And that's where Texas Southern got their law school from. Started out with a chair and a room and access to a couple of books and a couple of faculty. Well, eventually, of course, they integrated the University of Texas at Austin Law School. And a lot of those lawyers that did that work came out of Howard, and the books that they used to study to get those law degrees to go out and then change the world, including Brown versus Board of Education. So many of the voting rights cases, of course, are Texas cases. Alan Mercer Daniel provided those books. So to know that there's still somebody on their wall in their family in the law is a real blessing, Justice Brown. I want to thank you. That's a strong bloodline right there. Absolutely. So everybody knows who Carter G. Woodson is.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. That's important. We know that for the handful of people, and maybe a couple of young people who don't know, Carter Woodson, of course, being the man they call the father of African American History Month, or Negro history, when he started in 1926. Woodson was a fascinating figure in history. Again, the ancestors don't make any mistakes, so as I was listening to the presentations, Owen's presentation and McKenna's presentation, the whole idea of family separation, when McKenna opened up and talked about families being separated, reminded me of Carter G. Woodson's mother. Woodson's mother and father, James and Eliza, were born in enslavement in Virginia. When she was 9 years old, if I remember correctly, there's an article in the the Negro History Bulletin, 1943. And I'll say more about that in a second as it relates to education and the importance of education in African American History Month. In that article, Carter Woodson writes about the fact that his mother, as a girl, 9 years old, jumped down in the middle of the sale of her mother, his grandmother, and her siblings, asking and begging the auctioneer to sell her instead of her mother and her younger siblings rather than break the family up. So they put her on the block. They didn't get enough money for her, so they ended up selling it and breaking up the family anyway. And James and Eliza Woodson would eventually, of course, raise Carter Woodson and his siblings. Neither of them ever learned how to read and write in English. I don't want to call them illiterate because, literacy is just the ability to decode and encode in a language. So they couldn't read or write in English.
Right.
But her two brothers could, because they fought in that Civil War. And one of the reasons that they fought in the Civil War, of course, was to free themselves, but one of the other reasons was they learned how to read. And they came back and set up the schools that taught Woodson and his siblings. And then Carter Woodson moved to what is now West Virginia and worked in a coal mine and worked on the railroad until he was 20 years old. And then he was able to go to high school. He finished high school in a year. Yeah, this is a bad dude. When I hear young people say, oh, I don't know, or I hear people say I'm too old to go back to school. Now, Carter Woodson was 20 years old before he could wash that coal dust off his hands and get into books, because his parents always told him that education was the pathway to liberation. And then Woodson, of course, went on from there to Berea College in Kentucky, got his bachelor's degree, got a master's from the University of Chicago. That's where he set up the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History in 1915. And in 1926, he set up Negro History Week. And then he got a PhD from Harvard, only the second person of African descent to do it. First was W.B. Du Bois. But unlike Du Bois, Woodson was the only one to ever come out of Harvard with a PhD whose parents had been enslaved. And as best as we can determine with the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, which is Woodson's association, he's the only person that we have a record of coming out with a PhD whose family came out of slavery in that period. So this is Carter Woodson. But Woodson started what we now call Black History Month for a very specific reason. And it's funny because Carter Woodson's house, has anybody ever been to his house? It's in Washington, D.C. No, I have been. She came into D.C., made sure she went by it. It's been restored by the National Park Service. It was taken over by the National Park Service. Any Q's there? Any Omegas? I know some of y'all in that gang. Ain't any of y'all in Omega Psi Phi? Okay, I guess I should ask any Alphas in here. Oh, yes, sir. All right. All right. That's what we're talking about. All right, good. We got some of y'all like, what are they talking about? We just set tripping in here then. Calling the AKAs and the Deltas, I know. Yeah, see? You know I got to deal with AKAs all the time now because Kamala Harris running for office. And every AKA in D.C. and all of them at Howard just lost their minds. So I'm one way or another, I think she might end up in the White House because I suspect a lot of people are auditioning for the vice presidency. So either way. But anyway, Woodson was an honorary Q. During the first years of the fraternities and sororities of African descent in this country, beginning in the first decade of the 20th century, was Sigma Pi Phi. Probably somebody in here is in the bootleg, which was not an undergraduate fraternity, but an organization of black men. And then very shortly thereafter, with the Alphas and the Deltas and the AKAs and so forth and so on, they started going back in history and making honorary members of these Negroes who didn't go to college. So the Alphas ran back and got Frederick Douglass, who ain't never seen the inside of those schools. Made him an honorary Alpha. They made Du Bois an honorary Alpha, and so the Qs hurried up and made Woodson an honorary Omega. Well, they got the wrong one. Because Carter Woodson, who when his students or his colleagues would get tired, never married, never had children, lived in that house on 9th Street his whole life, the basement was where he stored his books with the Associated Publishers. He published all his books. The first, second floor were his offices, and the third floor was where he slept. That's where they found him dead in April 1950. He passed away of a heart attack there. 1950 was a rough year. April 1950 was a rough year. Charlie Houston, who just talked about, trained third-grade marshal, passed away that month. That was the same month that Charles Drew, 2 days before Carter Woodson died, turned his car over on the way to Tuskegee, fell asleep at the wheel and died. Charles Drew, of course, who created the first blood bank in the United States, got his MD in McGill University in Canada because he couldn't get it in the United States, and became one of the most brilliant surgeons and trainers of black doctors in the history of America. Tom was on the faculty of Howard for decades, and the reason that he went to sleep at the wheel in North Carolina was he was driving to Tuskegee for a conference because his students didn't have the money to take the train, and so he volunteered to drive them. And he had done a day of rounds at Freedman's Hospital, taught his classes, then got in the car at night, ill-advised, and went to sleep and died. So that was all in April 1950, I believe. So Woodson, they found him there in April 1950. He died on the 3rd floor of his house. He worked there. But he would remind his colleagues, I'm a coal miner. So y'all know how it worked me. And if you find a picture with Carr G. Woodson smiling where you see his teeth, I'm going to leave my email because I want you all to send me where you found it. Because I've seen some pictures with a little slight smile on his face, and I was looking, maybe he had gas. He just, but like uproarious laughter, smiling, that was not Woodson's thing. He worked his whole life. So when Woodson started Negro History Week, he got the Omegas who had made him an honorary member. He said, now, since I'm an Omega, right? He said, yeah, you're an Omega? Okay, fine. You all are going to be the ones that help me spread Negro History Week. And it was Omega Psi Phi that raised the money that actually recently helped restore Carter Woodson's home. But they were the first spreaders of Negro History Week after 1926, along with the black school teachers in the segregated schools, including a whole lot of them out here in Texas. Very important to understand, because Negro History Week was not designed during a period of integration. It was the black schools. And you know, the black schools had some incredible curriculum. They didn't have all the new stuff. But in terms of the scholarship, and probably like a lot of you all, I'm the first in my family to go to college. My mother's from Alabama. Just turned 90 in September, last September, and she made it to the 8th grade in Russell County, Alabama. Russell County, Alabama is near Tuskegee. Tuskegee, of course, Booker T. Washington, the Brownsville incident. Booker T. Washington begged his friend Theodore Roosevelt, don't do that. That's exactly right. But Tuskegee, they were segregated schools. She was in a Rosenwald school. Some of y'all know the Rosenwald schools where they raised money to build those little schools. And my mother, to this day, when she writes, it looked like a typewriter wrote it because they taught penmanship, penwomanship, penpersonship. Their scholarship was impeccable. They had the resources, but they put the steel in the spine of those young people. And Carter Woodson started Negro History Week in 1926 as what he said, the brief period of time when we celebrate what we've accomplished in the study of the Negro the year round. This is supposed to be the time when we talk about what we do starting tomorrow.
All right.
Which is why I still need to work this weekend.
Yeah.
I got to go to the academy Saturday morning. Why? Because it's in March. And we can't talk about that until next February. In Woodson's mind, it's what you do in June. It's what you do in October. It's what you do the whole year. And then he literally wrote this. It's very important to understand. If you look at the Journal of Negro History, 1926, he says, this is the plan for Negro History Week. Now, I'm sure somebody in here also knows why it's in February. The joke is, of course, it's the shortest month of the year. But we know that's not the case. Who knows that? And I'm going to kind of be quiet after a couple of minutes and maybe we'll have some conversation. Anybody know why he picked the second week of February? I know somebody. Please, tell us.
I think it's because of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln's birthdays, right?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
That's exactly right. Thank you. Abraham Lincoln. See, that's what I'm talking about. See, the beautiful thing about it is we're at the point now in history where we got folks who study stuff all the time.
Yeah.
So y'all ain't got to fly Negroes like me out to talk about it. Y'all can just kept this real local. That's why I'm glad y'all asked me to come, because I like meeting people and have a conversation. And then what I do is, when I go back to class next week, I'm telling the students all about y'all, like I told them when I was in Kansas City or Purdue. I'm talking about that. But that's exactly right. He said Lincoln is known as the great emancipator, although I like to remind people that black people freed themselves. That's right. I mean, I don't know that Lincoln ever put on a uniform and shot somebody with the Emancipation Proclamation, but I know that 189,000 black men and a bunch of black women who they would not let serve in the military, including the first woman in America of any background to direct strategy for troops in battle. That would be Araminta, which was her African name, but we know her as Harriet Ross Tubman. Of course, who told the soldiers what to burn and where to go on the eastern shore of Maryland, since she had been taking people out of there for years. They freed themselves. But Lincoln is known as the great emancipator, so that's exactly right. He picked Lincoln's birthday at the beginning of that second week. And Douglas's birthday, we mark on February 14th, Valentine's Day. And I'm sure there's somebody here who knows why. Douglas did not know his birthday. Right. But Douglas said his few memories of his mother, because he wasn't raised by her, his few memories of his mother included being told often by his mother that he was her Valentine. So he said, if you want to remember me at all for being born on a day, I picked February 14th because my mother called me her Valentine. So that's it. So Woodson picked that second week because of the birthdays of Lincoln and Douglas, who were friends, often combatants. Douglas never let Lincoln get away with anything else. He always fighting him, especially around that Civil War. And so he said, if we put these two together and we use that week to talk about what we have learned the whole year, we might have a shot at building a country. We might have a shot at building a country. Because what Woodson said was, this isn't, in fact, it's in that same Journal of Negro History. He says, this isn't a Negro History Week. It's really the Negro in history that we're studying. He said, if you just tell the history of everybody, the Negro needs no special pleading. And that is true. I guarantee you that's not going to happen. No, I'm sorry. We can't, that can't happen. I'll tell you what, if that would have happened, you can't have the United States. I'm very serious about that. You can't have the United States if you tell everybody's history. Because if you tell everybody's history, then there are beefs. I mean, I'm 53, so I know there's some people in their 40s, 50s who grew up and watched Roots on television when it went but 3 channels and TV went off. Some young people, I don't know nothing about that. Static, national anthem static. In other words, y'all, it blows my mind. My college students don't remember that. Right. TV used to go off, yeah. It used to go off. And there was only 3 stations. And then UHF came. It was a big thing. You had to have an antenna. But some of y'all remember when Roots came on. Yep. And every night the viewership got larger. Yep. In fact, the young brothers and sisters who remade Roots with the History Channel a couple of years ago, Will Packer, some of y'all know his daughter's a freshman at Howard now. Good young brother. This is the guy who makes his money on the commercial side. So he made Girls Trip, What Men Want, all those movies, but Straight Outta Compton. But he takes that stuff and leverages it into other projects, and they remade Roots. It's a brilliant remake. But that first one can never be replaced. Because every night the audience was getting larger. And around this country, I come to find out as a man when I was traveling around, going to school, talking to people, because I know what happened in Nashville. Every day in those formerly segregated schools we were bused to, the fights got bigger and bigger. You come to school on Thursday morning after watching some black man get whipped, and that night they cut Toby's foot off, you're looking for somebody to take that out on. But when Kizzy got sold, remember Kizzy got sold? And Sandy Duncan was like, oh, and then she met her again as an old woman, and Kizzy spit in the glass. That's a form of resistance, by the way. You look at the scholarship. So everybody couldn't run away. Some people just broke stuff, spit in stuff, killed animals. The women, the Igbo women, the Nigerians, you know these Nigerians, man, they poisoned James Madison's grandfather at Montpelier. There's a book called Murder at Montpelier that talks about it. I mean, I don't know why they were letting black women go in kitchens and cook. While you have them enslaved. In Boston, they passed an ordinance and said they can't cook because they will burn their houses down. So y'all have to cook outside. But my point is, every night Roots came on, the more we saw that, the more we're like, somebody got to pay for this. No, I don't care if you did it or not. I gotta do something about this. Now, it's interesting now to hear this conversation about reparations. You know, Texas is big in the reparations movement. It has been for 40 years. The National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. A lot of leading figures came out of Houston, came out of Dallas. In fact, I just saw my man, Kofi Taharka, who was the leader of the National Black United Front. He's in Houston. He was in Kansas City a couple of weeks ago. So the reparations movement, it really blows my mind to hear people now on Capitol Hill talking about reparations. As if that's a new idea. Right. In fact, one of the books I was looking at just passed. It's called My Face is Black is True. It's right there, Callie House. Callie House and Isaiah Dickerson started something in the 1890s, 1880s called the Ex-Slave Mutual Relief and Pension Fund. They said we're going to raise money for ourselves to bury our dead, to have insurance, and we're going to call for reparations for the government. And for that, they locked Callie House up, the federal government, in an early form of counterintelligence. Wow. This is 2 generations before Marcus Garvey. So reparations is an old conversation, but the fact that we're even having it speaks to something I think Woodson was smiling about. Woodson, maybe you're getting a little closer to being able to build a nation. Because until we talk about how we got to this moment, we're not going to be able to create anything that's going to last. Right. Especially in a country where those little children, the 3-year-olds, the 4-year-olds, the 5-year-olds are already majority non-white. But I'm in Texas, so I ain't got to tell y'all nothing about that. That's why I got to make sure you got all them IDs so you can vote. Right. I don't know how much longer they think they can keep this charade up. because you can't build a wall in a uterus. So when Woodson, what do you think you're going to build a wall up for you? I know you're working on it, Stephen Miller. I know you're working on it, baby. But it's already over. Go ask your niece. Because if she's 3 years old, everybody her age and younger already majority non-white. So if you want this thing to last, you better start changing your behavior. Because you might just see California decide they just going to break off. See, states' rights means something different when it's another political argument for it. Right. States' rights can go all kind of ways. So I'm kind of winding this up a little bit. When Woodson is talking about this question of the Negro in history, he's really talking about how we build a country out of all these different people. Nobody's ever tried it in world history. And believe me, as I said, we go to Egypt every August. And y'all welcome to go. First 2 weeks of August we go. Lord willing, we'll be there this coming up August. And we teach Egyptian hieroglyphs. So we studied the ancient Egyptians. They were very diverse, but they were all Africans, at least for the first couple of thousands of years. Right. In West Africa, Timbuktu, Mali, they had Muslims, they had people who believed all these different traditions, and they had places for them. But this settler state, nobody, not Brazil, not any of the Latin America, the Caribbean, the United States of America is unique in world history. You got some of everybody on the ball here. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And then a couple of flags. Now, that's not going to be enough. Right. Because some people don't even get up for that. In fact, Jack Robinson, in his autobiography that was published just after he died in 1973, said, I cannot salute the flag and I can't sing the anthem. He said, at my birth in 1919, here in 1972, I never had it made. Jackie Robinson wouldn't do it. They jump on Colin Kaepernick because they don't jump on Kaepernick and say you love Jackie Robinson because you better go read what Jack wrote. That man died at 53 years old, same age I am now. Hair Snow White, diabetes, died in a house in Connecticut, and his wife to this day, who still walks to earth, it's a blessing Rachel Robinson's still alive. She said, you know, my husband carried a whole race on his back. Yes. So he earned the right not to stand. And he was a veteran. They tried to court-martial. That happened right here in Fort Hood, right? Yeah, exactly. So my point is, if you're going to build a country, you're going to need more than a flag and an anthem. You're going to need a little bit of honesty. And so when Woodson says, I'm going to quote this directly from him. Carter Woodson, just before he died, he wrote this, and this is one of the last things he wrote. Carter Woodson wrote an editorial in the Negro History Bulletin. And by the way, that's why I said I was going to come back to that piece that he wrote with his mother in it. I should do that right quick. Take 60 seconds on that. It's very important. Because what Woodson understood is when you learn how to read and write, when you're going to be a scholar, you're not doing that just for your own benefit. You're doing that for your people. That coal mine he worked in, there was a brother named Oliver Jones who was a coal miner who was a veteran of the Civil War. He was in the Army. Oliver Jones had a little house in West Virginia, and the parlor, he subscribed to all the newspapers, black and white, that he could, and he bought books. And Woodson's job, when he wasn't working, was to be in that parlor and read to the coal miners who could not read. Right. And then they would debate the issues of the day. So they subscribed to the New York Herald, they subscribed to the Norfolk Journal and Guide, the Indianapolis Beat, all the black newspapers, the white ones, and he would read to them, and they would debate. And he told them, if I ever get to a position where I can, I'm going to tell y'all stories. That was in the early 1890s, 1893, 1892. In 1943, that same article where he wrote about his mother, he wrote about those men. The name of that article was My Recollection of Veterans of the Civil War. And Woodson kept that promise. Scholarship isn't just for your individual advancement. I have to remind my students at Howard that all the time, because America tries to teach you that scholarship is for you to go out and make money, and it's good to do that, but you're supposed to advance something bigger than yourself. Woodson's lesson is that. And so that's why Woodson said, just as he, let me quote this here. This is why Woodson said, just before he passed, this is what he wrote in April 1950. It is evident from the numerous calls for orators during Negro History Week that schools and their administrators do not take the study of the Negro seriously enough to use Negro History Week as a short period of time for demonstrating what the students have learned in their study of the Negro during the whole school year. Read one more sentence. This is an indictment, so. I think about all my friends who go out, and the only time they talk to black people is in February. He says, these mischievous orators, as it has been said again and again in these columns, have no message which they can connect with the celebration of Negro History Week about the only thing on the Negro which they know is the traditional discussion of the race problem and how it can be solved. Wow. He said, if in February is the only time you talk about black history, and when you talk about it, you only talk about the race problem, you've gotten this thing exactly wrong. It's exactly wrong. This is the period when you celebrate how you put everybody's story in the same narrative. And that is a challenge that we are so far from meeting that I don't know that we can meet it. I don't know how you tell a story about the American Revolution without going to Somerset's case in England, when the British decided that perhaps we should abolish slavery in the colonies. And maybe we could even extend some form of subject citizenship to these enslaved people over there, because George Washington was making a whole lot of noise. And so what you had in 1776, what we learned as a revolution, Gerald Horne and other scholars, Gerald Horne, University of Houston, says it's a counter-revolution. They had to break from England. And that more black people fought with the British or ran away than fought with George Washington. But that can't be in the textbook alongside Salem Poor and Peter Salem and the 8 black people that fought with George Washington. Wow. Because if you're going to tell the real story, now we got a problem. But guess what? The people sitting in there is like, yeah, they still screwing us. All of a sudden understand what they never understood when they read it the first time. Why are you not going to fight with you? Oh, they didn't. Now I understand. So could we do that is the question. Could we do that and remain a country? I think Woodson thought that's the only way you can have a country. Because he was determined to do that. Now I could go on, but I think I'm going to stop because I know we're against the clock. And there are a couple other things I wanted to say, but I want to make sure that we have some time for conversation. Do we have a little time? Okay. Then, man, you know what? I'm not going to hold y'all. Give me about 60 seconds on this though. No, I ain't going to go too much long because I want to have a conversation, and there are people I'm sure who got some comments, observations I want to make. But this is something I think is very important. At least this is what we're trying to do at Howard, and we're not new. Woodson was trying to do this. Woodson published a book. We all know his 1933 collection of newspaper essays, The Miseducation of the Negro. Woodson, boy, you talk about a dude. The people who knew him very closely said that he had a great wit. He loved children. The block in the house he lived in, right across the street, is the Phyllis Wheatley Y. Phyllis Wheatley, yeah. Is Phyllis Wheatley High School still in? No. They don't have no Phyllis. Phyllis Wheatley, Harriet Tubman, George Washington Carver, these are a few of the approved names for schools in the black community. Ain't no Paul Robesons and W.B. Du Boises. Them Negroes was communists, and you can't have a conversation about them. But Phyllis Wheatley, I know there's some Phyllis Wheatleys in Texas. Well, there's a Phyllis, and the YWCAs were often named Phyllis Wheatley as well. And one was down the block from Woodson's house. He never got married. He would go over there and eat breakfast, eat lunch, eat dinner with the young women in the Y. Those were the only people who knew what he did for fun. Because when he died, Du Bois tried to write his obituary, and he wrote to everybody, and they wrote back, we don't know what he did. They were like, yeah, but you worked with him. Yeah, I don't know what he did. In the next issue of the Negro History Bulletin, the children started writing poems and sending them in. See, yeah, he would take us for ice cream. Yeah, he would take us to the ball game. In other words, he didn't deal with what he thought were pretentious, bourgeois people. That's right. And so when he wrote the Miseducation of the Negro, those of you who read it, you know who he was talking to. When he said these miseducated Negroes run around here, think they'll get a job and turn their back on the community, he's writing about the class that he is technically in. But he started this history earlier than that. His first book was The Education of the Negro prior to 1861. That's what I wanted to mention for a second. What Woodson did was he put black people in history, and when you put black people in history, that means you're beginning with human history. And so what you really have, and this is the phrase I really wanted to bring out. What we really have in the black experience is the beginning of the human experience in this sense. From singularity into multiplicity. That's what human history is. We all started in one place, and then we spread out across the globe. Well, that one place was Africa. So technically, of course, we're all Africans. But the diversity comes out of the singularity. Then the question becomes, what part of the singularity do we preserve in order to continue to become diverse? Because the two things cannot operate without each other. Now, when we think about the African diaspora, that's a microcosm of that. Nobody got drugged into this hemisphere. Think about my friend, the late Amiri Baraka. It was like, yeah, they had like black people chained up and jumped in that boat and said, let's get to America. Can't wait. Because if you really look at the history, the way John Henry Clark, one of my teachers, one of Aya's teachers, she actually spent a lot of time with him in New York, used to say, if you start your history with slavery, of course, everything since then looks like progress. Look how great Barack Obama is compared to what? Oh, slavery, I got you. No, compare him to 10,000 years. This guy doesn't even make the top 1,000,000. Or compare him to the last century and a half. Harriet Tubman, Barack Obama. Do I have to choose? Because I have to choose, he's going to lose every time. But what Woodson says, if you start with the beginning, then that singularity that creates that diversity speaks to the human diversity, and it puts black people back in it. But that leaves us with the fundamental challenge. Can we create a country that does not have a racial hierarchy? Because the United States of America was founded in a racial hierarchy. Without that racial hierarchy, I'm not sure that there can be a United States of America. Because the myth of American exceptionalism relies on that fundamental normative hierarchy. That's why, what's the guy that made Hamilton? The play. I'm saying, you know, it's one thing to have a minstrel show where they black your face. It's another thing to have a minstrel show where you dress up like Alexander Hamilton and George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and make a bunch of hip-hop songs. And everybody pay $1 million a piece to go sit and sing along with it. And I'm like, are you serious? I'm not throwing away my shot. Do you know Alexander Hamilton made money out of the slave trade in the Caribbean? I'm sure you know that. That's my friend Ishmael Reed has been hell on Lin-Manuel Miranda. Dude, you Puerto Rican. I know you know better than to try to make George Washington a hero, rapping the Lafayette. Immigrants, we get the job done. Are you serious? This is a minstrel show. But this shows us the possibility of America. No, it shows you the violence of forgetting. That's what it does. And it ain't going to do nothing except postpone the day when this thing comes apart. Either we're going to tell it straight, or we just pushing this thing down the road. I'm going to stop with that. And hope we can have a little bit of conversation. I hope I made somebody mad enough to get up and excoriate me as another. Thank you. Thank you. There's a lot more to talk about, but I want to let's put some things out. Oh, y'all had to clap. That wasn't a clapping kind of talk. I hope.
So we have a microphone. Does anyone have any questions? We can take a couple of questions.
Or just comments in here.
Questions, comments, reactions?
Let me say something.
Yes, sir, Bob.
My name is Joe David. I'm from La Jolla, Texas. Harlem, New York, and Oakland, California, and through the Black Panther area and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, sir.
I'm that old.
They ain't that long ago.
Okay. Thank you for this. Thank you for doing a presentation on history.
Yes.
History is a great thing. I'm going to take it short. It's going to be short. I'm not going to be long.
It will be.
You don't stop me. Okay, I'll
She kind of laughing. She will cut an elder. She knows the protocol, bro.
Yeah.
That's all I'm just saying.
Okay. What I want to do is make a point,
yes,
but I don't want to make it short and you don't get it because this is a great crowd and if we don't make the point, we lost it again for another 400 years.
Yes.
So let me give me time just to make the point.
Absolutely.
Okay, the point is, I'm great that I appreciate you and the history and all of our firsts and everything else and what we got to do. But yes, what we all are in a survival mode right now, and what's happening is that whatever slavery did to us, or before the Moors got here, before Columbus got here, down in Mexico. Okay, mm-hmm, blacks were down there because they got statues down there of black people now.
Absolutely.
Okay, so here's what I'm saying. Right now, today, we are doing something like, if you're in the desert and you have water, okay, you don't want to give it up.
Right.
And I keep hearing a lot of presentations about people saying money is not everything. I'm going to do this real quick. I know people hate this word money. But money in the city and in America is like water in the desert.
That's right. Sure.
Don't waste it.
Sure.
if you see the examples of the history of Harlem, Oakland, all the places, Elm Street and Waco.
Yes.
Okay. We're losing our communities, businesses in our communities. Harlem was full of businesses. We lost it. Okay. Right. So why did we lose it? Because we do not have a plan. This man right here is on the board of a bank. He knows what a business plan is. If you do not have a good business plan, you can't get no money. If our community, you right here, don't come together tonight and make a business plan on how you're going to make Killeen better for your own community, you are going to fail continuously.
Yes. Appreciate you, brother. Hold on. That's okay. Thank you, Bob. Let me just say this very quickly in response. First of all, thank you. Absolutely right. A couple of things very quickly. Number one, Carter Woodson is cheering you on, I'm sure, brother, from the ancestral realm, because that was his point. Woodson lost a couple of grants. He got money from Julius Rosenwald, but he would not write grants that then came with strings attached. And he had real battles with W.E.B. Du Bois and others. He said, he said, if they fund you, they're going to try to tell you what to write. Now, how does that connect to what you said in terms of this question of a plan and building and wealth? Money in particular you get. Woodson then turned to the black community, particularly through the black church. He encouraged children to give pennies and nickels and dimes. And for 2 generations, he ran the Association for the Study of African American Life and History off of the contributions of poor black folks. He did it for 2 reasons. Number one, to show the black people that they could fund an institution that would lead to the education of everybody. And number 2, to show them that you didn't have to have a whole lot of money if you got everybody organized, which is the point. I think one of the points you're raising. If we all give a little, everybody got to give a lot. Right. And of course, land is the wealth. I started saying, you already heard that saying, land is one thing they ain't making no more of. Right. Until the Chinese started building islands in the South China Sea. But anyway, again, we live in a world. I know we try to believe we live in a country, but that's why the Chinese are looking over like, we really have an unbroken history of several thousand years, so we'll let y'all continue to fight between the remnants of the English and the Spanish empires, and then we'll come in and with the money, opt everybody out. But organization is the key to all the rest of it. And when I hear a conversation like, we don't have enough students, Brother Grace, to get his money to, then we realize that money becomes the marker for power, but power is really in human capital. That's right. Because that's a good problem to have. But it speaks to the fact that we haven't organized to the point where we have all the students applying where you got to go raise some more money. Right. Money comes after organization. And I know you know that because the Panthers founded in 1966, right? I was 1 year old. It ain't been that long ago. Yeah. You spent the time in California. You know all them Negroes from Louisiana like Huey Newton who came through Texas on their way to the West Coast to get them jobs after A. Philip Randolph and them threatened Franklin Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt's cousin, and said, we will shut D.C. down if you don't desegregate these jobs in the military. That's how they ended up in Oakland, Bay Area, and all that kind of thing. When their children started the Panthers, among other things, they said, we are building for survival pending revolution. Which I used to say, free breakfast, clinics, food. We're not doing this so that we have to do it forever. We're doing it until we do the second part of it. While we're raising money, while we're organizing, we then force the government to give us our money back because we pay taxes. Right. And so what the Panthers are saying is we're not against the government. In fact, the government has to work for us. But until then, we must build these institutions to survive pending revolution. So I appreciate what you said, brother.
Point, now sit down. Black people across the country earn $1.6 trillion.
Yes, sir.
How much money do you have 20 minutes after you get your paycheck? Zero. Why? Because you give it back to them.
But why?
Now, you do not have a plan on how to use that $1.6 trillion. Make a plan. You got smart people here. You got students here. You got all kinds of people with no business plan. Right. Come on. Where's our intelligence? Put the plan together to build our community by building, taking the money, and developing education for ourselves, businesses in our community that pass the money between each other. Yes. Keep it like everybody else does.
Yes. But I will say this as well. Intelligence entrepreneurship, all those things are beautiful without a common frame of reference. Memory. This is Woodson's point in terms of history. If you read the Education of the Negro, this is what he's saying. This is why historical memory is important. There's no incentive to do that kind of work if there's no sense that there's a reason based in a common experience. That's why myth making, that's why these flags and these anthems are so important. You have to create a common framework. The church does it, right? Everybody give up 10 cents of a dollar. Why? Look, I'm trying to get to heaven. So I was told, I shouldn't get too far off into that. Because one of the things during enslavement, one of the things they had to convince the Africans of was that there was a worldview where you could be X'd. In other words, non-existence was a possibility. That really wasn't a thing in African worldviews. Christianity introduced the possibility of non-existence. And if you can think about eternal non-existence, you do anything for that to happen. So that dime out of a dollar, I got no problem with that. But it requires a common framework. And so, like you said, when people give that figure of the trillions, 1.5 trillion, 1.3 trillion spending and spending wealth, that number doesn't mean anything to me because that category is meaningless. Black people, what does that mean? If there's no common sense, that's just a demographic. And so to translate that demographic into power requires a common identity. And that's what Woodson is talking about. And that's the importance of history. Appreciate you.
One last question or comment.
Oh, no. Okay, sorry. Can we get to my friend from Tennessee State? That's mine.
So it's been said that we need something equal to the violence of war to draw us together, because nothing has brought us together like war.
That's right.
In what I believe was a nation prior to hearing you speak tonight. What would be one of the most radical things that you think would need to take place in order for things to move in the right direction?
You know, it's interesting. A lot of folks, Cedric Robinson is a scholar that comes to mind, argues that black people did not buy into the American project in any kind of quantum leap fashion until World War II. For the very reason you put it. It wasn't the Civil War. Reconstruction was actually probably the closest this country ever came to answering that question. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments put the United States in a position to perhaps even take a stab at building the country they claimed they wanted. That's why when Du Bois writes The Suppression of the African Slave Trade in 1896, he says, no one would have looked on with more horror at the events of the Civil War than the so-called Founding Fathers. He said, which teaches us this historical lesson. The time to correct a wrong is the moment you create it. They sewed into the Constitution the foundation for what became the Civil War. When they set up Electoral College, when they set up the slave states, free states, the Missouri Compromise, all that stuff. And so it had to come to that. But that decade between 1865 and 77, 12 years or so, when they put those amendments in, that's when public education came to the South. Because black people got elected to legislatures in Texas and Louisiana and South Carolina and Tennessee and Mississippi, and they said everybody should go to school. We didn't go, so now everybody, and that's what allowed poor white people to come. But then the normative thing at the center of this project, whiteness. In fact, Gerald Lawrence says whiteness is the battle pay that a handful of elites gave to poor whites to keep them as a buffer between everybody else and them. Which then said, then they come and rewrite these black codes as we heard. And what do? They say, yeah, we got public education, but now you ain't getting it. Damn, we did this for everybody. That was the closest it came. So I guess what I'm saying is that the answer to that question, for me, I think it requires us, and this is what we talk about curriculum, to go back and study the achievements of Reconstruction. Not to go forward and say, okay, we got Oprah and Issa Rae, and look, they're going, it's great. No. Black Panther is the, because I don't feel good about giving Disney $1 billion for an imaginary Africa. Right. Especially when I know who Walt Disney was. And the fact that Mickey Mouse was a black-faced minstrel from his inception to now with them white gloves on. No. But Reconstruction shows us what it looks like when people who don't have things pull together and try to build something different. So to me, it will begin very practically with us teaching Reconstruction. If you go to there's a group called the Zen Education Project, Z-I-N-N, named by Howard Zinn. They're out of Washington, D.C. They have a website. Any public school teacher or a private school teacher, K-12, they have thousands of lessons written by school teachers on Reconstruction. A number of them on Reconstruction in Texas. You can download them free. And you can use those resources. Zen Education Project. And I've seen children studying Reconstruction ask this question after they come through a lesson. Why can't we do this now? The answer is you can. Yeah. And so then that's not fantasy. That's just like based in the best of what America has done. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, because my homegirl, she went to Tennessee State. You know.
Yes, TSU, Big Blue. You have to support your HBCUs. Let me say that. Let me say that there.
Yes.
This gentleman kind of took my question. It was really going to be like, what can we do? Because I feel like, you know, many African Americans understand the plight. I mean, we're in that struggle every single day. But yet, I was listening to a podcast and Cicely Tyson said it so correctly that she was speaking to some young people. And they said, we just don't get it. We don't understand. We don't get what it was like when, you know, we couldn't go into Walgreens, or you couldn't use the same bathroom as whites, or you couldn't, you know, walk down the street at night. They don't, there's a disconnect. You know, my father experienced that, so I very much firsthand would hear from my father. I now have 4 children who don't even really have any type of clue. I almost think sometimes they don't even feel right now, and I've probably protected them in that, racial disparity very much. They go to a very diverse school. It's a Christian school.
Yeah.
They're very supported. There's a lot of different cultures, and they celebrate that. So while they know from me that racism exists, and I tell them stories, and they, you know, when things come up on the news, you know, young black men getting killed by police and whatnot, we discuss those things, but I don't know that they have ever experienced or felt it. So it's hard to, I don't know, this gentleman over here that spoke, he has passion, and I just don't know how to evoke that passion in the youth. You know, you can palpate what he feels, because he experienced that. But our youth have more now than they've ever had in all of not all of history, but all of American history. Okay, yes. So it's hard to get that hunger, because they don't know what it is to be without, per se. So how do we solve that issue?
I would just say this very quickly. I know we're all facing this, particularly like those who have children. And I know as a teacher, I'm seeing it now, and every year it gets more like this. I won't say difficult, but challenging, because we don't have a roadmap for this. And those of you who know anything about cognitive science, some of y'all maybe, you know, psychology, particularly educational psychology. There's a lot of stuff been written on this more recently. There's a book called Reader Come Home talks about this. The movement in technology that has shifted away from print-based literacy to digital literacy, moving image literacy, emojis, everything, is literally rewiring the way we think. And we know that. But I'm thinking very specifically about contemplative thought. When you're reading a book and you're thinking, that's why radio will probably never be displaced as a medium, because it requires you to make up everything except the words. But the moving image literacy is rewrite. In other words, the idea that somebody would sit with a passage. I mean, if you ever read, in fact, I'll just mention this, I know we're going to do Lift Every Voice and Sing in a minute. You read James Weldon Johnson's autobiography, Along This Way, and he writes about how he and his brother wrote Lift Every Voice and Sing. And he said Rosemont was in the parlor on the piano playing, and I was out on the porch writing this poem. And as I started writing the poem, I was listening to him play with these chords, and he hits that note, and y'all know, sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. But Rosemont was a blues man too. Sing a song. That note. James Weldon Johnson, I heard that note, and the tears started to flow. And then when you read that, you can see him there, God of our weary years. Well. God of our silent tears. It wasn't that he was writing that alone. He was listening to his brother play that music. He's in there playing with them chords, and it hits him. But you have to read that in the book. It'd be great to make a movie out of it. If you make a movie out of it, now you got the faces and the music. No, reading is what develops, I think, to me, because that's what allows young people to then come up with their own creative dialogue with the text. So that passion, for a lot of us, it comes from reading. It comes from contemplating. But I think we're in uncharted territory, because this digital literacy is creating a situation where we are just consuming. And so that's why I think that passion now, can we get it back? Absolutely. Because I think Black Panther showed us that.
Yep.
That was purebred imaginary. And as somebody who knows the history of Central Africa, who knows that vibranium is not real, but what was real is when Patrice Lumumba said, you're not going to take the resource of the Congo, and that's when the CIA went out for him. So when I see that white character, Ross, in Black Panther, I'm like, y'all cheering for the CIA dude? You know that when Jack Kirby and Stan Lee came up with Black Panther in 1966, that was a metaphor in part on Patrice Lumumba in the Congo.
The same way Rocky and Muhammad Ali?
Yeah, well, you know what happened there. No, Muhammad Ali fought in Africa because the man who, after the CIA got rid of Patrice Lumumba, they put in Joseph Mobutu in the Congo. And that's how Muhammad Ali ended up in Zaire in 1974 for the Rumble in the Jungle, which is crazy because there ain't no jungles in Africa.
So for those of you who want more,
yeah, y'all can come Saturday morning. Yeah.
But on Saturday morning. However, we have an elder in the house who has a word she wants to say, so I have to give her the mic.
I'm glad you called me an elder, but I am an elder, maybe 86, so I don't care.
No, that's right.
I listened to this, and I've lived here a long time.
Yes.
The major thing I think among us, and I've seen blacks in this community try to come together to build things like have a car wash or, you know, enhance our economic status, but we don't trust one another.
Yeah, that's right.
We don't trust. How do you get us? This is one of the things the white man has done to black Americans. You don't trust one another. I have seen other cultures, say for example, some of the young Africans here, they are building.
Absolutely.
I don't know if they trust each other, but they get together and they are building. And I said, I've been here I don't know how many years. And they building businesses and stuff like that.
Yes.
And I don't see that in our black community because we don't trust one another. Talk about how we build trust, if you can.
I appreciate you. First of all, thank you. Now, my mom was 90, so you still be young sister to her, but I appreciate it.
I'm going to be 87, so
oh, okay, there you go. Look, I kid my mother all the time. Thank you. Yes, please. I'll just say this very quickly. You know, Saturday morning, what time?
9:30.
9:30. We can continue to have this conversation because John Agbu, who passed away maybe about 10, 15 years ago, a Nigerian-American scholar, educational researcher. He talks a lot about, and he's not alone, but he makes a distinction between an immigrant minority and a caste minority. And he says, when you look at, he was talking about education, African Americans in education. And what he say is, when you look at the performance of immigrant minorities who come into a space, they're not coming into that space for the culture. It's basically a business transaction. So the idea to aspire to a certain level of achievement and attainment for the family, for the group, their children come with a culture. Even if, and here's where Agbu says it gets complicated, because then you see after a generation or two, if those children assimilate, you'll see the performance levels begin to get closer to the people who are in the spot. Now clearly, I mean, and I'll use the Annellis as an example. Y'all are scholars, but y'all was born here, like I was. Except you come out of a root that was not from here. So I know y'all can't slack. It's just not in y'all house. Y'all can't sleep late. Look at y'all. See, we couldn't either, and here's where the answer comes. We couldn't either in part because in the Southern culture it used to be very similar. But that culture is not an immigrant culture among Africans born in America. It's a culture that comes out of enslavement, but the culture that came out of enslavement that was held together by Jim Crow was an achievement culture. It was not culturally deficit in terms of, it wasn't culturally poor. It is resource poor, but it wasn't culturally poor. Now, what has happened since then? In the several generations since desegregation, one of the casualties, and there's a lot of incredible stuff, including the way you described the school that your children go to. That's a benefit. My friend Nicole Hannah-Jones writes for the New York Times, talks about that all the time. Integration is an incredible benefit. One of the setbacks, however, was that there's a caste minority mentality that persists. And the caste minority mentality is often shaped by popular culture. So when did it become popular for black people to say, I ain't studying? You're not going to find that during Woodson's time or during the time you grew up. Right. That is a phenomenon, really, some people argue, of the post-desegregation period. Right. And when that happened, there's a lot of other reasons too, we can talk about that on Saturday. But when that began to happen, that tells us two things. Number one, we can pinpoint when these things begin to deteriorate, and trust is a consequence of that kind of thing, a spiritual thing. And number two, we can reverse engineer it and fix it. But it requires identifying when it began to happen. This is not eternal. We didn't get off the boats like that, in other words.
One more point, then I'll show you.
No, sir, we can't. We really can't.
Can we talk out?
Yes.
I'm going to be here Saturday, and I'm going to
tell you that
I am a wealthy man.
Yes, sir.
I came from a poor training, but I can show you how you can change.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, can we please show our appreciation for Dr. Carr?
Thank y'all. I appreciate y'all today.
Please don't leave just yet. We're not all the way through. Like I said, Dr. Carr will be at the Village United. It's 324 East Avenue D, if I'm not mistaken. Come early because there are only about 50 seats.
Oh, no.
So, yes.
It
is going to be good. When we go outside. You may be seated. Please don't leave yet. So there are a lot of things that had to come together for this to happen. I know he may have left, but I want to thank Mr. Fred. Brother Fred, where are you? Because he does all the audio visual. He comes early, he stays late, and I just wanted to show appreciation to him for that. How many of you partook of the hors d'oeuvres that were out there? The program costs money. Bringing in Dr. Carr, Dr. Carr costs money. So at this point, I think do we have envelopes or something around?
Yes.
Where are they? Are they?
Marcine's got them.
Marcine's got them. Are they going to be passed around? We really do appreciate any donations that you can make. The donations go to the Central Texas College Foundation. And allows us to continue to have these kind of programs. As that is being passed around, I do want to say this, that a lot of times when we come to quote-unquote Black History Month events, the idea is to be entertained and to have our fancies tickled, and that was not our goal at all with this. So my question for you, even as you may still have questions for Dr. Carr, is what changes for you as a result of what you've heard today? Because if you don't make a decision that anything changes, then this is basically like 2.5 hours of your life that you've just wasted. And time is extremely precious, wouldn't you agree? So to have sat here and to have absorbed, I hope, all that you heard, whether it was from McKenna, or from Anna, or from Dr. Carr, and to walk out of this room the same as you were when you came in here is really, truly doing yourself a disservice. So my question to you is, what shifts for you? What change are you going to make? And identify it now. And when we tweet and we Facebook and everything else, what knowledge are you going to be sharing with anybody based on what you heard today? What changes in your circle as a result of what you heard today? Who do you know was supposed to be here that wasn't here that should be there on Saturday? And make sure you have them out as well. So at this point, Antoinette, are you going to come up and do this part now? Really, girl? Aren't you AKA?
Go ahead, Antoinette. Antoinette.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give it up for our illustrious MC for the hour. She has done my part, and so I don't feel like it is necessary. But I do want the man that has the money to come back and write a check.
I know.
That would be great.
That's right.
So you all, let's give it up one more time for all of those who are on program. We are very glad that you came out. And we do do hope that you find it in your heart to give, because like Aya said, nothing is free, not even salvation. Someone covered the cost. And to keep this center up and going and to continue programs like this, it's important that we take our little bit, we put it together to make much, so that we continue to grow for those 3-year-olds that are on their way. That's right. So thank you all for coming.
Well, thank you all a lot for tonight's activity. We do have the pots going around. What do you call that, Marcy? Tray going around where you can put money in there, and you do have a debit card, don't you?
Can they give electronically as well?
Yes, we can take credit cards out at the desk.
All right, we'll just line
whatever
up.
y'all have.
Is Miss Dow's daughter here, Carla? Please come up to Carla right quick. We cannot have one of these activities without talking about Alice Dowse, who was a part in developing this center. She was in the process of writing a book before she passed away, and this book has been completed, and it tells a lot about the people who have lived here in Killeen. A lot of people's names, like the mayor, is in there, so say a little bit about the book and your mom.
All right. Thank you for having me here this evening, and good evening to everybody. Good evening. I wanted to show you the book tapestry. I do have it for sale outside. My mother did write it. She was an educator, a Girl Scout leader, a church pillar, and there's my mom up there. She passed away at the age of 86, and that was in 2016. And she was almost through with the book. She was in the final edit, so there was not much left for me to do afterwards, but just to make sure that I reviewed it before it was published and printed. But in this book, if you want fascinating, authentic history about the people here in Killeen and Belton and Temple and Harker Heights, this book is fantastic. I'm not biased because my mother wrote it.
No, you're not.
When I was reading it, I was fascinated by the things that I learned. I want to do a quick excerpt. It won't take long. From page 169, if you live, I grew up in Marlboro Heights. There was a family right around the corner. Her journal is in here, and my mother is the editor. Everyone in this book submitted journals to my mother about their struggles here and in Killeen and in Fort Hood and how they overcame them. It was about housing. It was about curfews, discrimination for soldiers. You're thinking you're in a military town, it would be diverse already, but still there were struggles that had to be overcome. And so on page 169, right around the corner, Jackie Bailey Stabler, if anyone knows her, I read a part of hers, and I was just so intrigued by what was happening. 169 right here, thank you. It says, I was pregnant when we arrived in the area. In October of 1963, I went to the hospital at Fort Hood to deliver my baby. Sadly, our baby was stillborn. In an attempt to make contact with the funeral home for our baby's burial in the city, I was told that no funeral home in Killeen or surrounding areas handled black bodies. We were also told that we needed to contact a black funeral home in Temple, and I did that. Our child was buried in Temple, Texas. In addition to being saddened, I was very angry about the denial of burial service in Killeen. Therefore, I called my uncle in DC and explained to him what happened. He advised me to contact my congressman in Maryland, the last place that I was living. He also advised me to take the information that we had to the post commander. We also did that. Again, fortitude, persistence. And it was then that we learned that all funeral homes in Killeen and surrounding areas had a contract with the government. Therefore, they could not discriminate against persons who requested their service. As a result of this incident, shortly thereafter, the Killeen area funeral homes began serving all races that requested their services. That's just an excerpt from one journal. This was real. This was really happening. This book covers 1940 up to 2010, And it doesn't matter, I'm told, where you start in this book. Front to end, pick a family that you know, the families are listed in the back, or just read where it opens. The journals are fascinating, and you will be surprised to see what was really happening in a military town that you think is already diverse because it's everyone serving and fighting together, but there were still different rules. So the book is on sale outside, and if by chance you didn't come prepared, there's a flyer. You can go online and purchase it. You'll have to add $3 for shipping, or you can contact me by the phone or the email that's on there, and it can happen for you. You can get the book, but they're outside for $25 right now.
And we'll have some on Saturday as well.
No, I'm gonna buy one. I'm gonna get the Saturday one, please. Yeah, we got it.
It truly is an amazing read. Those of you who were here at the same event, but last year, a lot of my presentation on the history of Black people in Bell County was gleaned from the stories that were in this book, and then I was able to go and search further. So really, every single person who lives in Bell County should have a copy of this. I don't care if you're Black or any other color, right? Because we're learning everyone's history. We should all have a copy of this. And as you're thinking of what to give people as gifts, why not an amazing book?
Yes.
Thank you so much. All right, so we are going to wrap this up because I know tomorrow is a school day and my kids are looking at me cross-eyed, but they love this. Later on in their lives, they will thank me for all of these experiences. So at this time, we're going to have the amazing, multi-talented Larry Davis to lead us in Lift Every Voice and Sing. So if you will please stand.
I don't know about the multi-talented, so thank you. As Dr. Nelly plays the background music, this is all of our songs. So let's all stand and let us lift up our voice and let us sing. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty.
right.
Yes, right there.
Did I get everybody?
Got it?
Ladies and gentlemen, let's have our benediction. Let us bow one more time. O Ancient of Days, Spirit of One, we call on Thee once again with thanksgiving for all that is said and done tonight. Bless us all to go forth and make a positive difference in our land forever. In Your name, we name it, aim it, and claim it. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you again.